Hello again. I'm here to talk about one of the greatest television situation comedies, or is it a comedy, of all time. But before I do that, I'd just like to ask you to share the love by subscribing, sharing, and once you've heard what I've got to say, commenting on it. I think a lot of people will agree with my first proposition, and that is that the American television series MASH was a work of genius. And the first thing we need to do when examining why that is so is to first recognize that it was a creature of its time. Well, actually of two times. Of the 1950s, when it was set, and the 1970s and early 80s when the series was made. Now, it's set in Korea during the Korean War, but it's actually a commentary on contemporary events in the US regarding the Vietnam War and the social change that was happening in America and elsewhere in the world at that time, between 1972 and 1983. It ran for longer than the war itself, 3 times longer than the war, which was only just over 3 years. And of course, people have made comments that there were multiple Christmases and it snowed far too often and all those things are wrong, but that really doesn't matter. The final episode of MASH in the US alone got 106 million viewers. Now, I think that may still be a record for a non-sporting broadcast, and it probably is because the way that the entertainment industry or television and streaming has splintered over the years, you don't get numbers like that on broadcast television anymore, although maybe you do cumulatively for short clips on YouTube. Not this one, that's for sure. The genius, and I keep using that word, of MASH was not only in the original casting, but in the way it navigated the changes that may have killed another TV series. It started off as an ensemble show about the stay sane antics of a group of US Army medics and ancillary staff in Korea during the Korean War. Now, that ensemble nature of the show did change, but I'll get to that later. Now, they had many characters who were quite eccentric, but still relatable to many of us. And so it was a kind of a division of who was the most sane, who was the least sane. And this is an issue that they did address in several editions of the show itself. But the genius, that word again, was when actors left the show and therefore their characters departed, they were not replaced by clones, as often happens in other television shows, and may well have been the temptation here. They were replaced with other unique characters. So, for example, Henry Blake, the ineffectual civilian colonel of the camp, was replaced by Colonel Potter, who was a battle-worn army veteran going back 2 other wars. And although he had a heart of gold, he brought a much gruffer personality to the role and gave it a kickstart that it needed. And bear in mind here too, Henry Blake was killed off, which in itself was unusual for a sitcom, but as they pointed out at the time, not unusual for a war. Trapper John, the married man who took a sort of when in Vegas approach to his life in Korea, he was replaced by B.J. Honeycutt, a very married man who struggled being so far away from his wife and his life stateside. A new dynamic there again. Nebbish, small-town boy, the company clerk, Radar O'Reilly, was replaced by the cross-dressing Klinger, already in the show, but it enabled some character growth for Klinger, and it led to quite a touching story arc for Klinger in the final episodes of the show. Something that wouldn't have happened if Radar had remained, or if Gary Burghoff, the actor, had stayed. The snivelling do-it-by-the-book Major Frank Burns, who was forever trying to have the playful Hawkeye and Trapper John discharged, was replaced by a mild-mannered Bostonian who listened to opera and merely found the antics of his colleagues boorish. And again came into his own as the show and his storyline developed. While brilliant in their MASH roles, it might be pointed out that neither Larry Linville, who played Burns, nor McLean Stevenson, who played Blake, were able to succeed even in television vehicles built around them. They needed to be as those characters in that cast. Now, of course, MASH can be and probably should be criticised for the lack of female characters or strong female characters. But to be fair, again, it was a creature of its time, both in the 50s, where it was set, and in the early 70s, when it began screening. And, of course, its situation, which was a male-dominant, I guess, testosterone-charged environment. But the character of Margaret Houlihan was allowed to grow. She became very much her own woman. And again, this reflected what was happening in the real world at the time as feminism grew through the 70s and into the 80s. So there was some positive change there. Now, of course, it's impossible to talk about MASH without talking about Alan Alda. And it's arguable if Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye, had decided to leave, whether the show would have survived, whether he was the one essential character. And he was, because Alda very quickly and I guess cleverly made the show his own. He became a writer and director of episodes, and he engineered it, along with other writers, into making Hawkeye the moral compass of the program. So there we have it. Am I right in thinking that MASH was a one of a kind? Are there other shows that had the same cultural impact, that were able to achieve the same things, to make us laugh a lot, but also to make us think about the world that we were living in at the time by deceiving us into thinking that we were looking at something that was a piece of history? Of course, the Korean War was nothing like the events of MASH, but then again, nothing on television is ever really like it is in real life. So there you have it. A few thoughts from me on the genius of MASH. And if you agree, I'd like to hear from you. If you disagree, I'd still like to hear from you. Use the comments, please. Like, share, and above all, can you please subscribe? Because a lot of people don't subscribe but watch these videos, and it doesn't cost you to subscribe. You don't have to watch every episode. No one's forcing you to watch it. But by subscribing, you register some interest in what I'm doing, and I'm told that that benefits me in terms of the algorithm. So it's free, and you're doing me a favor. What's not to like about that? Thank you so much for your time, and I'll be back with another nostalgic view of TV's past relatively soon.